I have to say, I'm struggling this morning. I'm struggling because I've been lurking in the background, listening to you all, and I've been watching the pictures coming through. And I tell you what, when you're sitting in London and you can see those pictures of Wales, you kind of think you're in the wrong place. I have a particular affinity for Wales. I left France. I was born in France. I'm French. I left France in 1985, and I left France to come to study in Wales. So I lived in Wales a couple of years at Atlantic College in Llantwit Major, and then I stayed in the UK afterwards, and I'm now in London. But it's always a great pleasure to be with you. I'm also really intrigued by the session you just had with your walk. I always say to my clients, we've developed a kind of thinking that our body is just a vehicle to take our brains to meetings. But we forget how much our bodies play an integral part in our decision making. And it took me back to some research that I wrote about way back about 10 years ago or so in a book about how our bodies impact our decision making. And it was silly things like if you show somebody a jar full of coins and you ask them to guess how much money is in it, depending on the weight of the clipboard you give them to record the score, they will give you vastly different amounts. So if you give somebody a heavy clipboard to write on, they will guess that there's much more money in the jar than if you'd given them a light clipboard. So I think there's something about presence and about reconnecting to the importance of all our senses. And so I'm in awe of the session you had this morning. But that being said, let me talk about what I'm here to talk about. And as Paul said, is this idea really about getting through, and we've been through tough times recently, and everybody was going, we're going to get through this. But if you dissect what they meant, actually, I think a lot of the time what they meant was let's get back. It wasn't getting through to somewhere new. It was let's get back to where we were. And I think that encapsulates a lot about what is likely to happen as we move forward. And I want to share with you some ideas that came from this book that we wrote. And I'm showing you this not as a recommendation to buy it, but rather to highlight the fact that I'm not the only one who did that work. So Katherine, my business partner, co-author and wife, and our researcher, Charlotte, who happens to be my daughter, got locked together through COVID and thought, well, what are we going to do? So we decided to try to contribute something. And we realized pretty quickly that in the list of critical people in the UK, writers and management consultants weren't on it. So our role was to stay locked in together. But we thought, well, what can we contribute? And one of the things that we did was to research what has happened in history after crisis and during crisis, and what happens and how do people get through them, and does anything actually change? Is it a bit like a school reunion, at the end of the school when you graduate and you say, yes, we will see each other every 5 years because we love each other, and you never see them again, only once every 10 or 15 years to make yourself feel better as they are aging and you are obviously staying exactly as you were. But, we all have these good intentions but actually nothing really changes, nothing really happens. And as leaders, what can we do? What can we do to help along? So, we're probably at a critical stage where I call them the four C's. We've had COVID, we've got climate, we've got conflict, we've got the cost of living, and we've got all of this kind of making this weird Venn diagram of hell in many ways for many people that you're looking after, and that your work contributes to their well-being. And so we're in this space where one easy thing to do, and I appreciate what Paul was saying, would be to kind of somehow panic. And then there's a lot of people who are extremely worried. Now, the problem if you're a leader is we talk a lot about sympathy. You've got to have sympathy and empathy for people. The problem with that is if I'm panicking and you're my leader and you're panicking, then you're not much good to me. But yet we've got to recognize we're normal human beings too. So I'm not too sure why we shouldn't be affected in the same way as anybody else in terms of the worries that we have, in terms of the fears that we have with the environment that we face. So one of the things is, well, how do we as leaders deal with all of this in a way that actually helps others get through it, and what does getting through it mean? So I'm going to share some thoughts with you that came from some of the research that we did. Now, please do write any questions, any thoughts, any challenges in the chat. I have to tell you in advance, I normally wear glasses. I'm not wearing glasses, not out of a sense of vanity, but I have two lights in front of me. And if I wear my glasses, I look like the devil and I'll flash some light back at you. So I can't even see the chat. So while I'm saying to you, put stuff in chat, I can't see it, but I will every now and again put on my glasses and we'll try to make this as much of an interaction as we can. I'm also going to get you to do some thinking and some group work. So we'll have a half an hour break where you'll be doing some work together and some thinking together. So we're going to try to interact rather than me talking at you for 2 hours. And the first thing I want to do is to kind of think about, so what do we mean by leadership? And when we talk about leadership, this tends to be the image that a lot of people have in their mind. It's too often a man, too often a white man, too often a white man who is assumed to have some kind of superhero powers of being able to see in the future and be visionary and all sorts of things that normal human beings just cannot be. And I think part of the challenge when we are facing the world that we're facing is if we've been brought up with this image that somehow a leader is superhuman, then it's going to be hard on us to think, well, I'm not sure I stack up. So the first thing I want to do is share with you my definition of leadership, and I'm not saying mine again as a way of showing off and telling you it's the truth, but rather saying it's not the only definition of leadership, and it may not be yours. And I'm always happy to have it challenged. But my vision of leadership came from this. Now, this to me is the picture that we should have in our head when we talk about leadership. And it's a picture that I took back in, and I remember exactly the date. It was in 2007, and I was doing a speech at Google at their headquarters in California. And I'm mentioning California because it's important to the story. But I was invited to do that speech, and Katherine and I traveled together, and we arrived at the hotel, and I saw that light switch, and I thought, wow, this is the best picture of leadership I've ever seen. So I took a picture. Now, you've got Katherine and I have been together for some time. She's used to me being weird, and I know it's a bit weird. So I took a picture of the light switch, and then I called reception, and I said, you know, I would really dearly love to be able to go to any room that you have without anybody in them. I'm not that weird, but if I could visit all the empty rooms that you have in the hotel to take pictures of your light switches, that would be great. That's why I mentioned California, because if you're in San Francisco, they've been doing drugs since the 60s, so they don't mind that kind of weirdness. They kind of embrace the weird. So they said, yeah, sure, we'll show you around empty rooms for you to take pictures of light switches. This is a true story. And so I went around taking pictures. And the reason I wanted to take pictures is not because, you know, it's a light switch and leadership is about vision. It's not because it's got a thermostat and it's about climate or whatever other poetic take you have on that picture. But what was really interesting to me was the screws. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but the screws are pretty much lined up. They've been done in a way that the line is horizontal all the way through. Now, the reason I wanted to see the other rooms is I wanted to work out, do you have to do it? Is it automatic when you put the light switch in that the screw line up, or is it a decision that the electrician made to line up the screws? And what was interesting was actually on the 6th floor where we were, all the screws were lined up in every room I visited. On the other floors where I managed to go into rooms, the screws weren't lined up. So it wasn't an automatic thing. There is an electrician in San Francisco who is going around lining up screws. Now, given that 99.999% of people are not as weird as I am and will never notice the screws, and if you did notice the screws, it is weird. Why? Why does it even matter? Now, there's a good reason as to why this should matter, and because actually in many cases when wire faults starts to develop, the switch moves slightly. So when the screws are misaligned, you know you're about to be in trouble. But forget that bit. The reason why it matters to me is because if you're having to have electrical work done in your house, don't you want the electrician who lines up the screws? Because you kind of know that she's likely to be the same electrician who takes her shoes off before she walks into your home. She's likely to be the electrician who stops halfway through and says, you know, Emmanuel, I know you wanted me to do the light switch, but that lamp over there doesn't look so good. And if I could just check, you know that that person is not just going to do what you've asked them to do. They're going to do what you've asked them to do and everything else they think is right. And that, in psychology, we call discretionary effort. It is not just contractual effort, not just what you've paid them to do, but their discretionary effort, what they know is right to do. And for me, that's what leadership is about. Leadership is not about getting people to do stuff. That's easy. You can get a human being to do most things, good and bad. It's called coercion. You do it by stick or carrot, whichever way you choose, but it's relatively easy to get a human being to do something. The thing which we need to think about is how do we get people to do everything they think is right? Why is it that when you walk into a meeting room and there's some paper on the floor, you'll probably pick it up? You don't have to. It's not contractual. Nobody's mandating you to do it. Why do you do it? You do it because you feel it's the right thing to do. So for me, that's what leadership is about. So I'm offering this definition of leadership as our ability to create the conditions for the positive engagement of others in the goal. Their positive engagement where they give us everything. And we do that by giving them the perception of challenge and support. I know the word perception comes across as wrong here. And what I mean by perception is not that you don't really care and you're kind of lying to them and making them feel like you care when you don't. All I mean is they have to feel it. You know, it doesn't matter if you think you've given me support. If I don't feel it's support. So you have to put yourself in their shoes, say, do we support and challenge people in a way that makes them want to positively engage with a goal? And the last point of that definition is we do that by taking personal risk. You know, if you go back to the etymology of the word leadership, leadership is the one who dies first. That's where it comes from. That's why if anybody ever sends you on an accelerated development program, you don't want to go, all right? The one who dies first, and we're going to accelerate it. But the one who dies first is this idea that actually, if you don't stand for anything, if you're not prepared to take any risks at all, then why would I? Why would I, as your follower, you know, go on that journey with you when you're not invested in that journey? So that's my definition of leadership. That's the words that I like to use. And by the way, at no stage in this is there any idea at all of hierarchy. It doesn't matter if it's in your role or not. That you're supposed to be a leader. It doesn't matter how high in the organization or how sideways or lows or whatever. It doesn't matter your job definition. With that definition, anybody can lead. Anybody can be that person that creates those conditions. Anybody can stand for something. And you know, you don't want to be the person who is remembered for what you tolerated. You want to be the person who's remembered for what you stood for. And that means that at some stage, there has to be an element of risk. You have to be able to stand for something. So that's the definition that I want to work on with you in terms of thinking about how do we progress through that? How do we make our way through this world, which is kind of in a kind of continual movement and facing, you know, tides and difficulties. So let me start with a number of things that I'm going to take for granted that I assume you have, okay? And it's a pretty fair assumption, I think, because you're here. And as Paul said this morning, there was competition to be here. So I'm assuming that you have those kind of fundamental, non-negotiable basics that make you the kind of person that others will want to follow. So number one, you know your stuff. Right. I'm assuming you know your stuff. If you know, if you're in HR, in leadership development, I heard this morning, you know about leadership development. If you're in, you know, finance, you know about finance. Whatever your stuff is, you know your stuff. I'm not saying you have to be an expert. I'm not saying you have to be necessarily the best of the best, but you have to know something. And it gives you an element of credibility in the work that you do. So that's a fundamental basic. I'm assuming you have that. The next thing is, I'm assuming that you know what you don't need to know, but you need to have an opinion about. Right? There's stuff that I don't know, but for me to be credible, for others to engage with me, they will expect me to have an opinion about. I know it's an opinion, I know it's not fully formed, but you will be in a lot of conversation where people will say, well, what do you think? And the reason why I'm asking for this to be a non-negotiable basic is because, unfortunately, in most organizations, we tend to grow through the organization by forgetting our opinion. We tend to fit in. We try to fit in. We try to be a good citizen. We try to be a good member of the team. And we have an assumption that we do that by not rocking the boat, and that any personal opinions we might have is not welcomed. And then suddenly we find ourselves in a sort of leadership position where people say, well, what do you think? And you have to pause and think, oh, now I'm allowed to think again. Now I'm allowed to have opinions. Now my opinions are actually demanded and valued. So I want you to reflect on the stuff. And I have to say, and I don't even know you, and there's 170 of you, so it's highly unfair of me to say, but I'll say it anyway, because I'm French and that's what we do. You frustrate me. People like you frustrate me all the time. And there is a reason why I spend my life being frustrated by people like you, is you don't know why you're good. You don't know how good you are. There are hundreds of people alongside you who are looking at you every day, and they'll never tell you, which also frustrates me. But they're looking at you every day and they're thinking, whoa, I wish I was like her. I wish I was like him. Gosh, if only I could be like him. If only I could be like her. And what you've got to make a deal through this week, and this is why I love summer school, please, please tell each other how impressed you are with each other. Just stop and say to somebody, you know, when you do that, wow, I wish I could do that. So be proud of your opinions, because they are formed into amazing bucket loads of experience and expertise and things that we don't have, because each of us are different. Each of us go through life differently. But if you can share of that, and if you can congratulate each other and appreciate each other and tell each other, I always say in child psychology, we always say you have to catch your kids doing good. You know how we always focus on our kids doing wrong? We go, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you should. And you've got to spend more time trying to catch your kids doing good. And it's the same for each other. If we could catch ourselves doing good, if we could spend time telling each other, this is what is so valuable in you, then we can start to build that comfort with ourselves, where we start to feel much more comfortable about having those opinions. Knowing that they are only that, they're opinions. They can be challenged. We're not the source of all knowledge, the font of all knowledge, but at least it helps us to navigate, and it makes us more credible to other people. So that's my number two. My number three, nobody likes my number three, but I don't make the rules. You've got to speak finance. Finance is the language of organization, public sector or private sector alike. Finance is key to actually, if you think about it, cash is the only cross-functional KPI in any organization. Right? I mean, how you spend it, the budgeting, the funding, whichever, as I say, public, private, third sector, whatever sector you're in, actually finance makes you able to understand how things flow through an organization. It helps you map an organization in your head. So you don't have to be an expert in finance. I'm not asking you to be an accountant. I'm just asking you to be friendly with one. All right? So find a friend who knows finance. They'll be desperate to have you as a friend anyway, because if they know finance, they probably don't have any. So, no, I'm sorry. I apologize to all finance people. That's a really unfair characterization. But no, finance is my number three. The last one is, I'm kind of assuming that people want to be with you, that people want to work with you, that you are a decent human being that people want to be associated with. I find the golden rule another source of frustration. Treat people how you would want to be treated. I'm not sure that's right, especially if you're a masochist of some kind, because that puts a lens on the self. I'd rather treat people how they want to be treated than how I want to be treated. So, this idea of windows and mirrors for leadership. Yes, you have to look in the mirror and see how you come across, but also look through the window and see what other people want. So make sure you have an interest in other people. And again, I find that the discussion this morning about walking together so fascinating because we develop habits in our offices, habits of ways of being that mean that actually we tend to be fairly unidimensional in the way we relate to people. And if you can break that by going on the walk, by changing the setting, it does open a whole sort of possibilities to truly understand other people and understand what makes them tick. So these are my kind of fundamental, non-negotiable basics. But then the important thing for us in terms of trying to think through how do we use the environment we're in, how do we build resilience, how do we get through, what does that mean, how do we get on, is to start to move to 3 different aspects. And I'll talk to those aspects. But before we do that, I want to get you to do a little bit of thinking together. And the little bit of thinking that I want us to do is built on, well, it's built on an observation. I don't know if you're on LinkedIn, but if you're on LinkedIn, it continually tells you when people have been promoted or people have got a new role or whatever. And I've got quite a lot of connections that I built through different conferences and events and consulting that I do. And every time I get a notification when somebody's been promoted to senior leader or whatever it might be, I just send them a message, as you do. I say, hey, congratulations, well done. Always knew it was going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And often people follow up and say, hey, Emmanuel, how are you doing? And we get to chat. And I would say 85% of the time, if I get into a conversation with somebody who's been promoted to a senior level of leadership, they'll say, oh, I don't like it. I fought for this role all my life. I've worked hard for this, and I don't like it. And if I say, well, why don't you like it? They say, well, I just don't do anything anymore. It's blah, 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 meeting, blah, 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 conference, blah, 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 speech, meeting. It's all blah, blah. I just don't do anything anymore. And there's a flip here that actually nobody realizes is, blah, 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 meetings is the job. It's what you do now. You don't do. You talk, you discuss, you engage. And that just doesn't fulfill. It's kind of like the mirror image of everything you wear. Because in order to get the job, you have to do. You have to do more, you have to be the best, you have to be first, blah, 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 blah. And then suddenly that got you the job. But the job, if you start doing everything, then you're doing everybody else's job. It makes you a terrible leader. So there is that kind of flip when you become a leader that actually doesn't resource what we call your achievement motivation. Your need to achieve. That's why, most of the senior leaders I know, either run marathons, drive fast cars, play golf, run bicycles. They do a lot of stuff in their own time, which is all about self-achievement. They don't tend to do team sport, because what happens is, because they're good at organizing, if they get on the team, then within two games, people say, oh, can you be the team captain? And then it feels like work again. But they're continually searching outside of work for something they can do on their own, that they can actually do. And that just takes us to actually, what is your role and how do you spend that time? Now, I think about work as 3 things. Okay. And I think about work in kind of like a perspective, and when you take a picture, there's the position you're in as the photographer, then you've got your foreground, and then you've got your background. And when you take a picture, you're focusing on all 3, right? You're deciding, where do I stand to get the best shot? What's going to be in the foreground? What do I want in the background? What do I know? What do I move? So you're spending your time thinking about those 3 lenses, if you will, those 3 positions. And work is the same. So at work, sometimes we are in the organization. we get in. And getting in is doing stuff, right? So if you're a HR leadership development person, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on the leadership development. It's just that's the one I heard this morning. The lady was talking about her role in leadership development. If you're in leadership development, then getting in means, you know, designing a course or delivering a course. Or if you're in finance, it means doing accounts, whatever your job is, it's doing the thing, right? Getting in. Then you get on. Now, getting on is a bit like when you step out of the game and you start talking like a coach. Have we got the right people? Have we got the right processes? Have we got the right capability? Are we actually doing the right thing? Could we switch things about? So that's thinking on the organization, not being in the organization, but thinking on the organization, thinking on your job, all right? Getting on your job. And then the last one is getting out. Could we do a completely different game? Why are we doing this anyway? Why does it even matter? Getting in, getting on, getting out. Now, one of the things that we found, Katherine, Charlotte, and I, when we were doing some work, is actually your job will always have a ratio of all three. All right, so you'll be doing some stuff, then you'll be required to think about how it's done, and then you'll be required to think why it's done. But as you become more and more senior in any organization, that ratio fundamentally changes. It changes because of the job description, but there's nothing to stop you from changing the ratio on your own. You can do that. You can start to think about, where do I spend my time? Now, of course, in, on, out will be different for all of us, right? Depending on what we do. So you could say, well, for me, out might be thinking about, I don't know, painting. We might be thinking about all the stuff you wanted to do when you're a kid and you stop wanting to do. So, you know, I for the sake of personal disclosure, last Christmas, Katherine and I thought about what are we going to get each other, and we decided we were going to get each other a course. All right, we were going to buy each other one of those online courses for something we want to do but we don't do. So I chose a watercolor course, and I thought watercolor is something I know absolutely nothing about, but I thought it'd be nice to learn watercolor. It turns out that I've learned so much about my work on myself through the practice of watercolor. It's a terrible medium. You can't control anything. You can't control anything. Now, my life, I want to control everything. All right. You just see the books and how I organize my bookcase to see that I'm kind of a guy who needs control in his life. So watercolor has been fantastic for me to learn something about myself. It's also been fantastic for me to learn about work, because a lot of it was architectural watercolor, so painting and drawings of buildings. And that's all about perspective. And there's vanishing points and perspective that comes towards you or away from you, depending on the number of vanishing points. And then that made me think about, but decision making is the same. The solution comes towards you when you've got more people involved than just one point, which would be blah, 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 blah. So even through practices that are completely different from what you do, it sheds a new light on what you do, which is why those kind of walks and conversations you had this morning are so important, because they give you different viewpoints. So that's getting out for me. For you, it might be something completely different. Getting on for me might be about thinking, well, actually, is there anything that I can benefit from what we've been through COVID on online? Should I be thinking about online development courses, programs that I can do, or should I do differently? Or what's the world of publishing? I write books. What's the world of publishing coming to? Should I go to self-published or publish, blah, 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 blah. That's for me. Getting on will be something different from you. But what I know for sure is that wherever you are, you need a ratio of in, on, out. And I'll share with you the secret of the ratio. On should be the biggest occupation if you want to lead. In, on, out. On should be the biggest. You should spend more time on your organization than in your organization. Of course, you don't want to spend too much time out, otherwise people realize they don't need you. So out is probably the smallest, on is the biggest. The ratio will be different for each of us. The frustration, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, the frustration is, where do people want you in a crisis? In. Where does the solution to the crisis come from? On. And that is the biggest frustration for any leader. You have fire, you have to fight fires, you've got to be in there, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And whilst you're doing this, you are not spending any time at all solving the problem, thinking about the crisis, thinking about. So the challenge for us is, how do we spend more time on where the environment, where the organization, where our followers as well as our bosses want us to spend more time in? You know, because yeah, I don't know. But my guess is that when you came on this summer school, you were told, you know, we value you. We think you're so important. We want to give you the time to step out and really think about yourself and really think about the difference you could make moving forward. And at the same time as they told you that, they're going to be on email the whole week telling you about, oh, by the way, I know you're on the summer school. I know you, but if you could, there's that thing that I kind of need, and and the world just doesn't stop, and in makes a lot of demand. So here is what I'd like us to do. I'd like for you to go out into your groups, and then for about, because I know the groups are quite large, and I want to give you enough time to talk, but for about half an hour or so, and I'd like you to think about and discuss what's your each individual ratio like. How much time are you spending in doing stuff, on thinking about how we do stuff and how we make it better, and out thinking as to why we do stuff and should we have some completely different ideas? In, on, out. What's your individual ratio? Why is it that way? Are you happy with it that way? Because you might well be, and that's great. And if you are, then how did you achieve that? That might be helpful for other people in the group. So spend about half an hour discussing that. Then we've got a 10-minute break where well, you've got nice places. I've seen the pictures. You've got nice places to go out. So go out for 10 minutes, you know, do whatever you need to do. And then we'll meet again at 12 to kind of bounce around the idea. And then I can share with you the 3 things that I think can help you reshape that ratio. So all I'm asking for you to do is get into your group, think about your ratio, exchange some idea. In the meantime, if there's any questions you might have, then write them down on the chat or whatever. And then when we get back, if one person in each group could just try to summarize the 1 or 2 key points for each of the groups and just write them on chat. So if you could make sure you nominate one person to write a couple of observations on chat, and then we can pick that up when we get back. Okay, so thank you for all those reflections and for those thoughts. I mean, a lot of time spent in. For a lot of people, too much time spent in. It seems to me that a big issue is one of resources, which a lot of people face. So you're kind of being dragged in because there's no other way to do it. I think there's a couple of reflections. So first of all 3 matter. Okay, so it's not, I am not, and I don't want to come across as the person that says, don't step in anymore. You know, you should be on and out and all that stuff. All 3 matter, and it's a question of finding the right ratio for you. So one of the observation that we had early on in the research that we were doing, Katherine and I, was it was a client in particular was saying, give us the magic ratio, give us the what should the ratio be? And there is no magic ratio. The only thing we can say is on should be the highest, second should be in, third should be out. That's kind of what we found in most of the research we've done with people who were effective in what they did. And out tends to be smaller by quite a margin. So, you know, 40, 50, 10, you know, 30, 50, 20, something. It depends on the roles that you do. Think about out as being where you're going to get energy to and you're going to get renewal. So don't forget out, and it's hard sometimes. I just don't have time. And that, I think, is a challenge because you have to look after yourself. If you're going to lead anybody, you've got to be in good shape and not I don't just mean physically, I mean mentally too, although the brain is an organ, so it's physical. But you've got to be functioning. Now, so in matters, and I always try to remember what is and isn't appropriate in. So is, when it's inappropriate, it is, and I say is because there's letter I and the letter S. It is when it's individual. There is some stuff that only you can do, right? Even if you're the CEO of something, there is some stuff that only you can do. That's your in, right? It's individual. So I for individual, S for symbolic. And somebody made the comment, and it's quite right, that people need to see you in sometime. There's some symbolic actions that you can take. There's the rolling your sleeves up, we're in this together, I'm with you, I'm working alongside you, I know it's tough. So it is appropriate when it's individual and when it's symbolic. Okay, that's when your in is appropriate. It isn't, and that gives us N and T. So it isn't when it is natural, it's your natural default. Okay, and again, that's the toughest one. Okay, that's why I'm talking about earlier on, the CEOs I know who ride bikes and run marathons and stuff. If you need to do stuff because it feels natural for you to do stuff, find another place to do it than at work if it is not individual or symbolic, right? So I know it feels good to do stuff because that's what got you to the place you are. But in the words of my good friend, Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. Yeah, the next job is fundamentally different to what got you here. So don't do it because it feels natural. Do it because it is symbolic or individual. And then the last bit of it is don't do it because you don't trust them. Yeah, so individual, symbolic is good, natural, and trust is no good. If you step in because you don't trust your people, then either you should spend more time on and actually give them the capability so you can trust them, or you might just have the wrong idea. So get to know them better, get to understand them better so you can trust them. And I see too many people who step in just because it feels good and they don't trust people. Now, of course, they won't be as good as you. That's why you got promoted in the first place. You got probably promoted because you were the best at something. So it's really hard to then look around and say, oh, but I don't, of course, but you're going to have to let go. Okay. Now, all that being said, that doesn't necessarily help when you find yourself with a complete lack of resources. And I'll move on to some of that. There's another point I want to pick up, a couple of points I want to pick up in the feedback that you gave. One of them is somebody mentioned that the feeling that organizations are going back to reintroducing loads of stuff, and that actually the pandemic freed a lot of people in their work. I've seen that a lot, and I can say this is not, you're not the only one to feel that. I think there's a piece of work that we all need to do wherever we sit in the organization, which is a piece of thinking which says, all the stuff we didn't do because we didn't have the time, because we were facing, what do we need to reintroduce and what can we let go of? And that's not just, that's a collective conversation that needs to happen in most organizations around actually, what is it that we freed the organization to do? And a lot of the time, there's some stuff that we freed them to do, we did because we were facing a crisis, but actually, if we never reintroduce it, we'll be in trouble, right? So planning, budgeting, the stuff that went out of the window, actually, we need to do it, and we could afford not to do it for a period of time, but we need to reintroduce it. If that's the case, then let's have a conversation with people around why do we need it? How could it be done differently? Otherwise, we're going to miss a lot of the opportunities. The other thing I wanted to comment on was somebody said, why don't leaders show their vulnerability? I think that's an entire 2-hour session, another 2-hour session. But for all it's worth, here is my thinking about it. One is because we don't know how to show vulnerability skillfully. And Rob Goffey from the London Business School always says, leadership development is about being yourself more with skill. I think being vulnerable as a leader without skill can send panic, So, you know, it's okay. I mean, it's like if I came on this call this morning and said, by the way, I know absolutely nothing about the topic I'm about to discuss with you, and I am so scared doing it. I think at some stage you would have thought, hang on, do I really want to spend 2 hours with that guy who's going to, you know? So I think you have to learn to show vulnerability with some skill. So that's number one. But from a personal point of view, I think most of us just don't want to show vulnerability because we're afraid. We're afraid of the consequences. We're afraid of appearing weak or lesser. And it comes back to this idea of leadership. But it also comes back to this idea, which was the frustration I gave earlier on, which is you've got to be comfortable in your own skin. You've got to be okay with you. You know, and it's a lifelong journey to be okay with who you are, to be okay. You know, it's hard as a human being to be able to say, actually, you know what, Emmanuel, you're all right. You know, I'm all right being you. You know, it's okay being you. And once you've accepted that, which you can call wisdom or you know, I call it executive maturity. Once you've developed that maturity to say, okay, I'll never know everything. I'll never be a best-selling author. I'll never know everything there is to know about everything. I'll never be this or I'll never be that. I'll never be, and that's part of my frustration with watercolor. I know I'll never be one of the greatest watercolorists in the world. That's tough for me to accept, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it to enjoy myself. So I'm learning to enjoy myself differently or whatever. So learning to be okay with yourself is the start of being able to show vulnerability. And it's hard to do that when you're constantly running, and running is in the business, when you're constantly firefighting, when you're constantly doing that stuff. Now, let me offer one little word of hope in and amongst all of that. Part of the problem with the way I lay the question in front of you was to say, how much time do you spend in, on, and out? Like it was 3 completely different activities. Now, one of the things you can do is spend in, on, out whilst doing one thing. And I'll give you an example which you can't necessarily relate to, but it's one of the best one I saw. So Katherine and I were doing some work with the chief executive of a financial institution in Australia, and really fascinating guy. But he was having a meeting which he'd asked us to sit on and witness because we had to give feedback, whatever. But the meeting was about the allocation of bonuses for the senior leadership team. So on the face of it, it's an inactivity, okay? And only him as the CEO can sit there in his bank with his executive team and allocate bonuses, okay? So it's a legitimate in, but it feels like an in, right? We sit down, we go through a list of names and say how much he or she is going to get. But what was interesting in that meeting is halfway through, he just stopped and said, you know, we've been talking about this for about half an hour and we've been banging numbers around. But actually, we've been looking at targets. One of the things that we need to spend just 5 minutes on is, are we allocating this in line with the values of the bank? Are we really allocating our budgets for bonuses in line with the values that we have as a bank, with what we say we aspire to be? So suddenly that conversation, which is an in conversation, becomes a non-conversation, right? We're now talking about, is our policy in line? Is our progress in line? And then Shane, that's his name, being Shane, turned around at the end and said, and anyway, why are we paying people? I mean, surely, if we're the greatest bank that we want to be, if we're that amazing place that we say on all our posters that we are, that we tell all our customers, people would want to work for nothing. Why are we giving bonuses anyway? And then suddenly, here was the weird question, which launched it into an out conversation. Why are we doing this? Why is this even matter? What do we say when we say we're a great bank, and so on and so on and so forth? So here was an hour's meeting, which could have been an in the business meeting. It became an in, on, out. So it is possible, if you change your mindset slightly, to address questions differently, to carry on doing the in, to hack the in, to become more of an on. And especially if you've got issues with not enough resources, you can't just ignore the in, because otherwise the whole thing would fall apart. So my only tip here is to say, first of all, make sure it's legitimate, right? So it's either individual, only you can do it, or it's symbolic, you're doing it to show something, and it's not because it feels natural or you don't trust them. So that's number one. And if you have to do it because you don't have resources, then try to hack it, try to change it, try to ask, actually, what am I learning here? What are we learning? What is it that we can do? Can we just try to flip it to being more of an on? Okay, so that's kind of by way of a couple of answers. Now, I know I haven't read everything. So one of the things that I'll do at the end is I will give you my email. And I will make a promise to you, and I'll make it to everybody, and I genuinely mean it. I will never try to sell you anything because I don't have time to do anything anyway, and I don't have anything to sell. And I'll never kind of, ignore you. So if there's any question, anything specific, anything in your personal situation that you don't want to share or you'd like to talk about, or you'd like to share, send me an email and I'll pick it up and I'll reply by email. The only time that I'll stop is if you're stalking me and you're writing to me every 5 minutes, because that's just weird. But I promise you, I'll ever come back to you and I'll never try to sell you anything. So it's not a sale ploy, it's a genuine offer. So at the end, I'll give you my email. If there's anything on that you need help on, come back to me. Otherwise, I'll plow on with the chat as well after the meeting and pick up anything and contact the Academy Wales team. The other thing I should have said is, as you can see, I don't use PowerPoint, so I have things flashing on my screen. I do have PowerPoint slides, however, and we'll make them available to you. So if you see anything on screen, you don't have to write it. We will give you access to all the PowerPoint. So thank you for doing that. Let me just share a couple of things, and I mentioned those before, which the reason why I wanted us to reflect in on out is because most of what I'm going to talk about requires you to spend time on, but it's also going to be the activities you can do whilst you're in. Okay, so for me, what makes a difference to how we're going to tackle the world moving forward as leaders is if we can do those three things. They're the things that differentiate you in terms of what's going to make a resilient and an adaptable leader. So the first one I call relationship, relationship, relationship. The second one, leading, but for what? And then the third one is everything starts and ends with a conversation. Let me just give you some thoughts on these three. So let's start with relationships, relationships, relationships. Now, most of what we do through people. And yet, what is fascinating to me is we have very little insights anymore at work about how relationships work. We do in our personal lives, but when we come to work, we tend to forget. And I know we tend to forget because of this. This is Starbucks. Now, I was going to say, I don't know if you've got Starbucks in Wales. That sounds so bad. That's like the people who go, have you got electricity? You got broadband? No, of course you do have a Starbucks in Wales. But if you go, what I should have said, what I really wanted to say is, I don't know if you go to Starbucks, but if you go to Starbucks, they've got this weird habit of asking your name. They said, can I have your name? And so this is my cup. When I go to Starbucks, I always call myself Tom. And I do that because otherwise I spend half an hour spelling my name, right? Because they go, what's your name? And you go, Emmanuel. And they go, is that Manuel? No, it's Emmanuel. Is that with an I? No, it's with an E. Is that two L's? No, that's a woman. Mine's got only one. It's just endless. So I call myself Tom. So now I say, Tom. But I know it doesn't work because every time I go in, they always ask for my name. And I go in every day. So they should know. But the point is, you can imagine a group of executives at the Starbucks headquarters in Seattle sitting down around a table saying, we need to create a culture where we really, I can't do the American accent, I wish I could, but we need to create a culture where we really connect, like with our customers, feel the love, and we know them by their name, like it's a friendly neighborhood cafe and stuff. And then after 10 minutes of conversation, it becomes a target with a process, collect as many names, write them on the cup, shout them to the person, and you think that's not a relationship. Okay, it's just a process. It has no meaning, but it starts in a good place. I'll always remember, I tell you, don't do the Tom thing, okay? I was we'd gone on holiday, Katherine and I. We were in New York. I was completely jet lagged. The coffee was so expensive in the hotel that even Starbucks sounded attractive. So I went down to Starbucks, completely jet lagged. And I'm standing in the queue, and the guy said, what's your name? And I said, Tom, right? Except I was so tired, I kind of forgot. So picture the scene, long queue of people, this barista lady with a cup going, coffee for Tom, coffee for Tom. And everybody, including me, looking around going, oh, come on, come on, man, where is Tom, And then I remembered. So we're in the queue and I go, oh, that's me. And then everybody looked at me like the guy's just remembered his name. That's how much he needs his coffee. That's how tired he is. So be careful. If you're going to call yourself Tom, remember that's your name. But you can see that. And people, it becomes even more. So Amazon, this is a genuine email I got from Amazon. Amazon write to me and say, Emmanuel, we know you so well. We can call you Emmanuel. We're almost on a first name term now because you buy stuff from us and we love you and we know everything about you and we can recommend books we know you're going to love. Now, you know that this is not a relationship because actually on that email, 2 of the books they recommended I buy, I wrote, all right? They're my books. So they're writing to me saying, hey, Emmanuel, we think you're going to like those books. Now, of course, I am going to like them because I wrote them. So I know they're good. But I also know from a business point of view, buying your own books is not a way to do it. So the point I'm trying to make is, of course, you can have technology. Of course, you can have knowledge. But a relationship is different from that. And we need to relearn to what it means to have relationships at work. So here are the 5 dimensions that I think make for an effective relationship. First is utility, right? I have to see value in having a relationship with you for that relationship even to start, right? But utility on its own, which is what Amazon have, they want a relationship with me because they want to flog me stuff. Utility on its own does not make a relationship, right? You need reciprocity. You will need the other person to want to have a relationship with you. Otherwise, it's not a relationship, it's stalking. And you will be amazed the amount of stalking we do in every organization where we say, oh, can you give me this? Or can you give me this? Or can you give me that? I need this, I need this, I need this, I need that. And there's no reciprocity. Now, if there's no reciprocity, there's no relationship. So reciprocity is what is in it for the other person. Now, if there's value in it for me and there's value in it for you, then the relationship can start. Now, it needs 3 elements for it to carry on, all right, for it to be a valuable relationship. The first thing is safety. I need to be able to know that I can be vulnerable with you, that I can tell you I don't know something with you rushing around telling everybody else or I need to feel like I can trust you. Maybe not looking after my children, but at least looking after my work or whatever. I don't think trust is binary. You can trust people with some tasks, not others. It doesn't matter. But I feel safety in that relationship. The next one is warmth. Now, you don't need to be jolly and happy all the time, but there needs to be some warmth in a relationship for it to continue. It's hard to have an ongoing relationship with somebody who's always down and out and always telling you off or whatever. So there has to be some element of humanity, some element of warmth. And then the last one I call maintenance. It has to be straightforward to have a relationship with you. And I'll give you an example. So I was doing some work with a guy who worked for a television company, and I was having a one-on-one meeting with him, and he was talking to me about his boss. And the conversation went something like this: she was fantastic, she was amazing, best boss I've ever had, and now it's all gone wrong since she's left and she's moved. It's terrible, and I can't see her anymore, and she doesn't seem to care, blah 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 blah. And eventually, I had to stop him because I knew the lady, and I said, "But hang on, I didn't know she'd moved." Right? I didn't know. I mean, it sounded, the way she was describing it, we were in London, it sounded like she'd gone to Australia or something. He said, yeah, she's moved. She's on the 6th floor now. Now, we were on the 5th floor, all right? So we're talking 1 flight of stairs, right? But 1 flight of stairs for that guy made that the relationship suddenly was hard to maintain because it wasn't as easy as to just look up and say, hey, boss, or whatever, like he used to do. Now, that maintenance, that little bit of effort suddenly made it feel less warm. It made it feel like maybe she didn't care so much. So if she didn't care so much, then he was starting to feel somewhat unsafe. Well, maybe she doesn't care about us anymore. Maybe she's planning stuff and she didn't want us to hear it. And if that's the case, then maybe she doesn't care about that relationship. And if she doesn't care about that relationship, well, then why should I? And what I saw was that actually the relationship started to go wrong from maintenance upwards. The harder it was to maintain the relationship, the more likely. So when they tell you, long distance relation or the hard absence make the heart grow fonder, it doesn't, right? Make it easy for people to have a relationship with you. Make yourself accessible. The more accessible you are, And sometimes accessibility is just a smile on your face. Sometimes accessibility is just looking up when somebody calls your name. Sometimes, you know, I'm not saying, but it's hard. And especially in pandemic times where social distance has increased. The more social distance increases, the more we need to become socially aware. And the more we need to make it easy for people to have access to us, the more open we have to be. Otherwise, things start to go weird. And when they go weird, they're likely to go wrong. Now, and by the way, it's the same in life, right? I mean, it always amazes me when I get people to map out their network of relationship, and they always forget on the network of relationship to put their families. Because I say, look, who is critical to you achieving your work outcomes? But actually, whomever it is you call when once again you're not going to pick up the kids because you're in a meeting that's running late, or whomever it is. I mean, you're all senior public servants in Wales. You probably have chauffeurs and stuff. But all those people who make your life easy, they're critical to you achieving your outcomes. And what always worries me is that, you know, as leaders, we're a bit like a battery. We give energy out all the time. That's kind of our job, right? We give energy out. But then we're empty. So we go back home and we refuel, right? So we refuel at home and we spend it at work. And then we go back home, we shattered. So we refuel, we go back. And you think if the energy flow is only one way, if you take it from home and give it at work, then be careful. Because at some stage, somebody else at home might think, actually, you know what? Maintenance, warmth, safety, reciprocity, utility, that's not so good anymore. So make sure that the energy flow goes both ways. Now, never ask a Frenchman for relationship advice. Okay, that's true. All right, that's a rule in life. So I'm not saying anything other than be mindful of how you operate in terms of those relationships, both at work, but also in your life, because your life will impact your work somehow. So that's how we maintain. Now, the biggest problem people have is utility, is reciprocity. We all have utility in our relationship, but how do you create reciprocity? How do you become magnetic to people? So actually they want to help you. Now, here is and I put an elephant here for the elephant memory. Now, people always say, look, if you remember only one thing from what I said, I've put a lot of work and a lot of energy into this. So I'm hoping you remember more than one thing. Okay, that would be bad if you remember only one thing. But if you are going to remember only one thing, this is the one. Okay. There is probably the only silver bullet to leadership that I know of, the only thing that will get you to be a leader 99% of the time is down to your ability to answer that question. And that question is, have I made them feel stronger and more capable? Have I made them feel stronger and more capable? I came to the UK in 1985. In 1985, you used to run an advert on telly. And I know because that was one of the first things I understood in English, because I didn't speak any English when I arrived. And I remember cracking that one, and I was so pleased with that. But the advert was for recruiting teachers. And it said, nobody ever forgets a great teacher. That was the advert, right? It was a teacher recruitment thing. Nobody ever forgets a great teacher. And if I said that to you, nobody ever forgets a great teacher, and I'm sure you had one, you probably had one, right? There's probably one that pops up in your head, like a great boss, a great mentor, a great teacher. There's always one. Now, what is interesting to me is if you try to think about why were they a great teacher? And why do I remember them? They weren't the people who necessarily made you happy. It wasn't the people who made you happy. It was the people who made you stronger, who made you more capable. And it's an important distinction. I'm not saying you shouldn't aim to make people happy, but it's an important distinction that you should be aware of. So, you know, my little boy George, his name is George, not Boy George. I'm not that weird. But when George was little, he wanted to learn to swim, but he never wanted to get in the water. That's an issue, all right? If you want to learn to swim, at some stage, you've got to get in the water. If my aim as a parent had been to make George happy, George would not know how to swim, okay? Because I wouldn't have put him in the water, because every time he went near, he started to scream, all right? Now, what I did not do was just to push him and laugh and call him useless, all right? I could have done that, but that would have cost me years of therapy and whatever, not worth the risk. That would be mean. That's what we have a tendency to do a lot at work. Push people in the water and laugh and call them useless because they can't do it. But what I did is I took George and I said, look, George, I know exactly how you feel. To be honest with you, I was exactly the same. And to this day, I don't think water is my natural habitat either. So, I'm with you. But together, I'm sure we could crack it. So you hold on to your son or your daughter and you take them in the water and you hold their hand and you do whatever you need to do. But they're not happy. But you're making them stronger. You're making them capable. And you're doing that by challenging them, but supporting them. Right, which is the part of our definition that I put on the beginning. If I wanted him to be happy, he would have never swum because I wouldn't have put him in the water. I don't want him to be scared, but I want him to be strong and capable to achieve the things he wants to achieve. Now, if you can do that as a leader, if you can think for yourself, have I made them feel stronger and more capable? And I insist on the have I made them feel. So you don't want to be a bully. You want them to feel stronger and capable. Not just saying, oh, well, yeah, I pushed him, but, it's for his own good, because that's just daft. But if you can make them feel strong, if you can make them feel capable, if you can give them support, if you can give them challenge, encouragement, if you can be there, then that's when it's worth being on the in. But your role, providing that, making them feel stronger and more capable, is an on role. Now, what is interesting to me is if you do that, then there will always be utility. Another thing people say is, oh, trust, it takes years to build. And it doesn't. If somebody makes you feel stronger, if somebody makes you feel more capable, even if they only do it once, the automatic response is a positive and a trustful emotion. You want to be near those people because they've made a difference to you. And if you can be that person who makes people feel stronger and more capable, you will get reciprocity. They will want to help you, whatever it is that you need. So when you're thinking about, I need this from my boss, or I need this from this peer or whatever, and they don't have to give it to you. That's why I choose boss and peer, because they don't work for you. They don't have to give it to you. Just think, what can I do that would make them feel so much stronger and more capable? How could I help them? And maybe it's taking a risk. Maybe it's telling your boss about that thing that they don't know about, that everybody knows about, but nobody wants to tell them. I don't know. But find a way to make people feel stronger and more capable, and they will always want to give you reciprocity. So when you think about relationship, map out, who do I need alongside me? And am I sure that there's reciprocity? And if not, how do I make them feel stronger and more capable? One of the other problems with relationship is we tend to spend too much time on relationships that work because they're more comfortable, or too much time trying to fix relationships that don't work and disregards the one that works. So try to have a sense of where do you spend your time in those relationships. Now, why does that matter? Because what you find is that if you don't have enough resources to do the on, then share the on. If you got the right relationships, you can actually share the load to make sure that the on gets done. You can start to think about, well, actually that part I can't do, but maybe Jim or Emma can do, or whatever, however you want to work it. Okay, so relationships are key. Have I made them feel stronger and more capable is the first question that I need you to have in your head. Now, after relationship, we come back to this, but leading for what? And this is the discussion that Paul started in the introduction this morning. We all have this crazy vision of leadership, like somehow leaders have a long view like that, and they can see far away, whereas we can't. As mere mortals, we don't know, but leaders have vision. They always say, oh, leaders must have vision. Where do they get it from? I don't know. I mean, that's a bit weird. That's kind of Harry Potter world. So you think, okay, that's not the world, though. And it's not the world. The world of work doesn't look like that. It looks like that. You're driving at 200 miles an hour on a motorway. It's illegal. Your windscreen wipers are broken and it's pouring down. And you've got to make your way and you've got to get there safe because you've got the kids in the back. That's the world of work, right? It's not a clear vision, sky thinking. So it's kind of that thing where, when you fly, all right? Now, personal disclosure, vulnerability, all in one go. I hate flying, right? I've got a job this is what the only benefit to the pandemic, I don't have to fly anymore. I used to be on planes every week and I hate every minute of it. But the bit that really frightens you when you're frightened by flying is when you get on the flight and then the pilot says, we're going to cruise at 24,000 feet. If they say 32, you're cool, right? Because 32 is where CEOs live, okay? 32 is above the cloud. Everything is beautiful. It's all sunny. It's all bright. It looks lovely. Little clouds that look like sheep, right? You see that cultural sensitivity there? I threw sheep in just for the Welsh thing. Anyway, so, or 500 feet, right? 500 feet is cool because you're coming to land. Everything is clear. You can see the buildings. You can see everything. It's marvelous. 24,000 feet is the cloud, right? You know you're going to be flying like this. You know it's going to be like going like that. You live at 24,000 feet. That's where you live, all right? Your job is at 24,000 feet. You're not at 32. You're not at 5. You're 24. It's bouncing all around. So in that context, you can only move up and down. You don't want to stay at 24, but you've got to know what it's like, know what it's like, know what it's like, know what it's like. So try to find the way. Now, how do you do that? You do that with this guy, all right? Now, this is my second animal that you need to remember. It's a panda. The only thing that is bad about doing this online with you muted is you can't hear the natural reaction to this picture. The natural reaction to this picture is 173 people going, oh, oh. It's a panda, right? And everybody goes, oh. It's a useless animal. All right. The panda, now let's be clear on this. The panda has no right to live. Okay. The panda should be extinct. All right. The panda is a carnivore, halfway through its evolution, decides to go vegetarian, chooses the only food that it can't properly digest, and refuses to mate. Okay. Now, nature for millennia, kill that thing. Right? Now, the only reason it's still around is because every time you see one, you go, oh, and you give a $5 to the WWF. Right? The WWF don't even bother explaining what they do anymore. They just show you a panda and you give them a $5. That's what we call discretionary spend. All right. Here is $5 that I had for something else. I don't really have my $5 because they show you a panda. My question to you as leaders, therefore, is what's your panda? What's your panda? What is it that you're going to show me, that you're going to say to me, that as your follower is going to make me go, I get it. Have my effort. Right? Remember, we want discretionary effort. I get it. Have my effort. What's your panda? What do you stand for? And then Paul already talked to us. It's all about narratives. It's all about narratives. And think about it this way. Look, this is a film poster. All right? I haven't actually seen that film. I've been using the same slide for years. I've never seen that film. But that film is called Fighting. And if you look at the tagline, it says, I wish I had a deep voice and an American accent. Some dreams are worth the fight. Right? That's what the tagline says. Some dreams are worth the fight. Now, if you see that poster and you hear that tagline, you kind of know what the film is about. You've never seen the film, maybe you have, but if you have never seen the film, you know what the film is about. You can make it, you think, okay, yeah, probably poor guy, Midwest the US, doesn't have any money, only has his fist, he's going to fight, halfway through the film, going to spot a girl or a boy that he fancies, they're kind of going to get together, but not quite because the other party is going to go with a jerk, but then at the end they're going to be all right, he's going to find some more, blah, blah. You think this is Rocky with a better looking guy. Okay, you've played it in your head. Now, what that enables you to decide, do I want to see that film or not? Do I want to spend my hard-earned money to go and see that film? That's what I'm asking you to do. That's your panda. Your panda is me saying, do I want to follow you? It's a narrative. That's what Paul said to us. It's a story. It's a narrative, the narrative of you, the narrative of work with you, the narrative of what you're trying to achieve. Now, the way you develop it, you don't have to be in Hollywood, but the way you develop it is simply through a series of questions. Who are we? Who are you? Well, that's me. That's you. Okay. Or that's you. That's you. You see, you've got to tailor your slides. It makes people feel. That's not you though. That's gone. That's gone. That's not, that's okay. I tell you, I will put everybody on it. It's just simpler. But who are you? Who are you? And who are we at work? What is this thing about? What is this team about? What is our work about? Who are we? Where are, where do you want to go? Where do you want to take us? Where do you want to go? No, of course, and you've got a week together to challenge each other. Who are you? Well, find out. Let people give you feedback. Give feedback to people. Help them to find themselves. Help them to find, and not, oh, well, you didn't do that too well. What did I do well? And then where do you want to go? Where do you want to take us? What's your view? What do you stand for? And then why? Why are we going there? What's the point? Now, if you can start to develop your panda in a way that says, that movie poster of yours, whatever it is, that enables people to get it. Now, what you don't want is a 24-slide PowerPoint deck that tells them who you are, where you want to go, because that's like when your kids say, hey, Daddy, can you read me a story? And you say, right, okay, let's start. Bullet point number 1, 7 dwarfs. Bullet point number 2, Snow White. She meets, boom, apple. That's not a story, okay? You want to involve people in it. You want to talk with people. You want to have a narrative. So that panda becomes a critical element of people saying, if I get that, then I can start working on the on with you. Then I can start to point out where we might have flow. So it saves you time. You don't have to do all the work. People will come up and say, if that's kind of what we want to do, how about this? How about this? How about that? You're giving them the ability to exercise that discretionary effort. The same as when I showed you the film poster, I didn't have to tell you what the movie was about. Your brain was doing the work for you. Your brain was telling you, is that the kind of film I like? Is that the kind of film I want to see? So that's where we want to be with that panda. That's what we want to start saying. So relationships. Okay, that's where we go when we say, have I made them feel stronger and more capable? And if they're stronger and more capable, that's where we go to the panda. And the panda is really about who are we? Where are we going? Why do we want to go there? And what I'm asking you to do this week is don't think about the we, think about the I. Who am I? Where am I going? Why do I want to go there? Because we know that the sooner you become okay with who you are, the sooner you will have that maturity that enables you to show that vulnerability and bring people with you and make them stronger and more capable. Third one and last one. Now, I always say everything starts and ends with a conversation. It's a tough one. And I tell you why it's a tough one, because we live in a world where many leaders are behaving like this, like Elvis. They all have the same theme tune. A little less conversation, a little more action, please. You know the song. A little less conversation, a little more action, please. Can we stop the blah, blah, talking? No, we just need to get it done. We just need to get on. We just need to get on. We just need to get it done. And the first time I thought about that, it made me think about George, my boy. And George and I, so George loves salt, okay? And when he was little, I should stop saying my boy. I mean, George is 22. But when he was little, George would always have so much salt, right? And if you didn't stop him, he would literally empty a salt pot on his plate. I mean, it was that bad. Now, I could have explained to George and had a conversation saying, now, George, what you need to think about is salt, whilst an interesting condiment in high doses can be damaging to your health, given you are my son and therefore are likely to contribute to the pension that I will eventually get. You are kind of an investment. I need you to be able to be healthy and productive for as long as blah, blah, blah. So now I think you're reaching the tipping point when we move from good condiment to bad condiment. So therefore my advice to you as your father would be for you to stop putting. So I could have done that. But I didn't. All I had to do was this, George. And the magical thing is, whatever it was, every time I did, George, he stopped. All right. When I said, George, what he heard was, George, stop. Whatever it is that you're doing, look back and look happy. All right. That's how it worked in our house. I would go, George. And it would work every time. All right. Every single time. Now, then people say, but you see, Not everything starts and ends with a conversation. You didn't have to have a conversation. You just go, George, and he would stop and he'd look happy. That's what I want with my people. Now, the thing is, people forget. George and I grew up together, right? George arrived, I had no idea. So we had more conversation, even when he couldn't talk. We knew each other intimately by the time that he understood that George meant stop and look happy, whatever happens. That took a lot of work to do what linguists call an indirect speech act, when you act not on the basis of what has been said, but on the basis of what you've heard, which is two completely different things. So, of course, everything started and ended with conversations. And we need to have more conversation. And just like I say with our children, we need to have positive conversations. We need to catch them being good. It's the same at work. I hear too many leaders. One of my bear bugs. I don't know if you have leaders referring to burning platforms. It's a really American thing. But a lot of leaders over here do it as well. They say, oh, if you want to change anything, you need a burning platform. It's a sick analogy, right? It's a sick analogy because A, when a platform burns in the oil industry, it's not funny and is the last thing you want. But B, it also doesn't work. Because on a burning platform, and I did some work, fortunately and unfortunately, I did some work with some of the psychologists that were involved in the Piper Alpha disaster in the UK. And what they can tell you is, on a burning platform, however well trained people are, actually, you don't know how people are going to react. Because in danger, some people just, it's not meant to be a pun, but some people just freeze. They don't know what to do because they're frozen in fear. Some people just disappear because they're afraid and they run away. Some people have their training kicked in, others don't. So you don't want a burning platform. You don't want to change through fear. You don't want to make people feel uncomfortable to change. It doesn't work that way. What you want is a different kind of conversation. Now, for the HR people amongst you, we all know of this thing called Appreciative Inquiry. Now, there's a booklet that was written some years ago now, but I still refer to, and I admit to having given it to quite a few people, even though they don't work for the Welsh government. But actually, it was Academy Wales who produced a booklet on Appreciative Inquiry in one of the spotlight little booklets that they do. And I will try to post it to you. Have a look at it. It's a great little resource to understand what Appreciative Inquiry is. But in a nutshell, what it is asking people to talk in a different way. It's saying, instead of having the usual conversation that we have as leaders, which is to try to fix something. Our conversations are always about fixing something. What's broken? What do we need to fix? Let's start with a conversation that says, you know, when we're at our best, what's happening? Who's involved? Why are we at our best? Truly. So we understand why we're at our best. What's going on? Let's try to put as much effort understanding when we're at our best than when we're broken. And if that's the case, can we dream about what would it be like if we were always like this? What would we need? Can we design something? Now, if you have that kind of conversation with people, then not only have they got their panda, so they know the field of play, but you've just given them the opportunity to contribute to how we're going to achieve anything. And that's about appreciative inquiry. That's about starting from the good, starting from the excellent, starting from the worthwhile, rather than starting from the broken. Of course, you're going to have to fix the broken, but you can only fix the broken when you know what good looks like. You know, have you ever seen that New Amsterdam series? Now, I only saw New Amsterdam because most meetings that I have, I always start by saying, how can I help? And then one client of mine said, oh, you've just nicked that from New Amsterdam. And I'd never heard of New Amsterdam. Now, New Amsterdam is I don't know, Amazon, I think it's on Amazon, series that it's a doctor at a hospital, and he's the CEO of the hospital. He's very nice. It's a nice. I like it. But I'm a crier. I cry in front of TV programs all the time. So that program gets me going. But New Amsterdam, the CEO always starts everything with, how can I help? And that to me is the most powerful question, because suddenly, how can I help starts a new conversation. And it's your ability to walk around the world saying, how can I help? Because people will start to talk to you about their difficulties. And you can reframe it. You can say to them, interesting, but surely it's not that bad all the time. What is it then when you're at your best? And you can use that information, but you can only do that if you open yourself up. So if you think about my 3 questions, have you made them feel stronger and more capable? What's your panda? And how can I help? They are fundamentally different questions than the one you're being called to answer most of the time. And they're the questions that enable you to carry on doing the in that you've got to do in a crisis, but reframe the conversation on, so that you can start to see how you can create a new tomorrow rather than wanting to get back to yesterday. I hope that makes sense. There's enough time if you've got a few questions, but I just want to leave you with a thought. First of all, with that picture that I think is insane. It's an elephant looking like a panda, like the ultimate Emmanuel picture. I found that online. I thought this was brilliant. So remember the elephant. Have I made them feel stronger and more capable? And remember what's your panda. But also just, and I know it's not fair to finish with a number, but I want you to remember that number and keep that number in your head. I don't know if you think 14,600 is a big number. I don't know if you think it's a small number, but 14,600 is roughly, because I had to average it, the number of days you have left to live, right? So quite a cheerful note to end on. They always say you need to end on a cheerful note. But 14,600 is the average, kind of roughly number of days you have left to live, which doesn't sound like that many when you put it that way. Now, back in 2000 and it was 2003, I think, we did a piece of work in the US, over 1,000 people over the age of 65. So we went to people over the age of 65 and said, look, can you tell us, if you could have all your time again, what would you do differently? All right, what are the 3 kind of regrets? It wasn't kind of like, you're about to die thing. That means 65 is not that all. But just saying to people, look, if you could have your time again, what would you do differently? Now, what was really interesting is 3 answers kept on coming back. The 3 most common answers, slightly articulated slightly differently, but I'll tell you the 3 most common, okay? I would take time to stop and ask the big questions. I would be more courageous and take more risks in work and in love. And I would try to live with more purpose to make a difference. These were the 3 things that people told us they regretted when they got to the age of 65. Well, as I say, articulated more or less differently, but the 3 most common answer. Now, the trouble is it's hard. It is hard to stop and ask the big questions. But if you don't, then who? Now, living with purpose and making a difference. Now, you are more lucky than most of the people I work with. What you do is amazing. And this is not me blowing smoke, as they say. You're incredible. And those of us who you've helped through the work that you do can tell you that. You're incredible. You live with purpose. You do make a difference. It's much easier for you to do that than somebody who makes washing powder or light bulbs. Your work counts, and your work counts for people like us. And I tell you, we have been thankful, and we will not show it because nobody ever shows how thankful they are to civil servants of any kind or charities of any kind, because we are twisted human beings. But we should, and we should stop and say thank you. So you do live a purpose. You do make a difference. But why wait? Why wait until you're the age of 65 to do all of these things? Because one thing we know is tomorrow the world is going to turn pretty much the same way as it turned today. The only difference is there'll be one less, because that's for sure. So on that note, as I said, this is my email, and this is the last C. I started with 4 terrible C's. Okay, I said, climate and conflict and COVID and cost of living crisis. That's the C that I hope you take away as well. Because if you're not well, we're not well. So maybe it's a socially distanced hug or a virtual hug, but it's a hug I hope you can give yourself to actually make sure you're okay. And if there's anything at all that you think about, I want to drop off or want to, please, please, please do email me. Don't Google Emmanuel, that'll get you in trouble. It'll take you some weird and wonderful 1917s websites. So don't Google Emmanuel, just go any permutation of my surname would be fine. But that's where I am. Email me and I'll respond.